In this video, I really want to talk specifically to the bank angler about cold water fishing tactics, a few things that will help you to catch bass in cold water. Now, if you fish primarily from a boat, I still think that you will be able to apply some of these tips to your boat fishing to help you catch more bass. But I do want to talk specifically to the bank angler in this video because I know there's a good portion of the people that watch this that do fish primarily from the bank. So I want to get really specific on the bank angler. Now, before we get into those cold water tips, this video is brought to you by my apparel company, Fin Fishing. A lot of you guys know this, but I just came out with a new pair of shorts over at Fin Fishing. These are the duck shorts. These are something that I've worked on for a long time. I am very proud of them. I have two different colors, a lighter gray, a darker charcoal almost color, almost black, but these are a durable, stretchy, lightweight material. They have a kind of a partial elastic waist, so they really fit well. To me, I think that they are the best shorts out there, and they are water resistant, which I think is really important if you like to fish. But anyways, I know it's not short season, but they are on sale right now, so I thought I would let you guys know, kind of an introductory sale. So I'm gonna leave some links down below in the description and in the comments. Shopping at Fin Fishing is truly the best way to help support this channel, and I greatly appreciate all of you who have done so. All right, let's talk about bank fishing in cold water. Now, I really had the privilege of growing up on a pond. My parents had a 1 acre pond in their backyard, and growing up, I did a ton of fishing throughout the entire year. Pretty much as long as there wasn't ice on the water, I would fish for at least a couple hours every single day. And I fished a lot in that pond. I also did a lot of creek fishing and even bigger lake fishing from the bank as well in cold water. And there's just kind of some key things that can really help you to get around fish, or at least be around fish when you are fishing in cold water. And this can be some of the coldest water that you will fish all year long. For some of you who live up in the north, I mean, this is all the way into the ice hits. For some of you who live in the south, this may be in the dead middle of January, where your water temps are maybe in the 50s, whatever it may be. Cold water is what we're talking about. Bank anglers is what we're talking about. Now, the first thing that is extremely important whenever you're fishing in cold water from the bank is to try to figure out where the deepest water relative to the body of water that you are fishing is located, okay? And look, I know that we don't have fancy electronics when we're bank fishing, but you can simply do this by casting out a weight or a jig or whatever it may be, a plastic bait, and letting that thing fall and simply counting down how long it takes. This is something that I did a ton growing up. I would literally just cast out a jig. I would count how long it took to hit the bottom. And because honestly, if you're fishing a pond, it's not like there's going to be some sort of, highly detailed contour map of a pond. And what I found is that a lot of different ponds out there, you would be surprised at where the deepest water in those ponds are. A lot of us, at least I know myself, originally always thought that it was like, it's gonna be in the dead center of the pond, right? And there are a lot of ponds that are shaped that way, but a lot of ponds are also kind of shaped where one side of them will be the deepest side. There will be a really deep spot close to the bank on that side. And if you're fishing in a creek, a lot of times you're gonna see that those outside bends are always where the deepest holes of the creeks are. So anytime that I'm fishing though in cold water, I always like to know where the deepest water is, again, relative to the body of water you are fishing. In some ponds, this may be 6 foot deep. In some ponds it may be 15 foot deep, 20 foot deep. I've fished some really deep ponds in my life. Same thing with creeks. All you're looking though for is the deepest water relative to that area, because this is going to be the wintering area for a lot of bass. A lot of bass are going to go to the deepest part of a pond or of a creek, and that is where they're going to be for the winter. Now, what I have found over the years is that bass aren't always located in that deepest part, but they are a lot of times very close or adjacent to the deepest part of that lake. For example, there's a pond that I always fish a lot, even like I just fished it like a year ago, and there's this hole that is really close to the bank where the one bank kind of slopes and it kind of flattens out. The other bank is like a steeper drop, and there's actually some rock even on this bank. And I always go right there. I cast out into that hole, and I will drag a jig or a soft plastic, and we'll get into lures here in just a minute. Actually drag it upwards up that bank. And so I have found that over the years is that sometimes bass, you know, in really cold water will be located in the deepest part of that hole. Sometimes they are only in a couple foot of water. I will catch them literally very close to the bank edge, but again, they're not around the bank edge around the whole pond. They're just on that bank edge that is closest to that deep water, that is adjacent to that deep water. So anytime that you are out there fishing in cold water from the bank, try to find some of the deepest water that is relative to that body of water, because a lot of times that is where you're going to find populations of bass. And real quick side note for you guys, if you fish like small rivers or creeks that flood a lot, you will see a lot of flooding during winter, where you get to the lake, it's muddy, it's high, it's moving. I'm just gonna let you know to probably go ahead and pass up a lot of times those days, because in cold water and muddy water can be the most difficult place to catch a bass. And so if you get to the body of water like a river or creek and it's flooded and it's moving and it's high and it's cold, just go find somewhere else to fish, because it's going to be very difficult to catch bass in those areas. And hey, we don't want to waste time. Now, if you catch a bass there, you are Kevin Van Dam. So be very pumped about that. But anyways, getting back on track, let's talk about the second thing when it comes to ponds is I always like to fish very subtle lures in ponds. Subtle lures in cold water are always the deal to catching fish. And so basically what this means is lures that don't have a ton of action. So one of my favorite cold water baits has always been just a jig. And I love a Strike King Bitsy Bug jig, usually the 1/4 ounce version. There's one that has a thicker hook. I can't remember if it's called like a flippin' Bitsy Bug, but it has a little bit of a thicker hook on it. And I just like that because it's just a little bit higher quality hook. Now, on the back of that jig, I almost always go with the Zoom Super Chunk Junior in the smaller one. And guys, I actually made a video over on BassFishingHQ fishing this exact same technique on a pond, and I'm gonna leave it linked at the end of this one so that you guys can watch it. But the big thing when you fish a jig is a lot of times in the summer, I like a jig that has a lot of kick. I'm putting a crawl style bait a lot of times on the back of a jig where it's kicking. In cold water, you can definitely have too much action in your baits and it will deter bass from picking up. So when it comes to a jig, I like that just straight chunk style bait. Also, a great pond lure is like a shaky head style technique. That is a great lure that I use a lot. And the big thing here is that you do want a shaky head, or you want a plastic that actually rises off the bottom a little bit. I really like the floating plastics in this situation. For example, X Zone has, I can't remember the name of the worm. I'll leave it linked down below, but the worm itself is a floating plastic. And in a lot of like ponds, you will have kind of silty bottom, but bass in cold water will still almost at times sit on the bottom. But I think that they do like to have that worm where it's kind of coming off the bottom, where they can just pick up the tail of it and swim off. But really dragging that worm super slow across the bottom that is one of my top techniques. A really light shaky head so that you're not gonna pick up a lot of that muck. You know, I'm talking like an 1/8 ounce is on the heavy end here. And so that is a great technique. Another really great technique is a very, like a very small, like a 1/4 ounce lipless crankbait. This is by far one that I think that goes a little bit under the radar. There was times fishing the pond that my parents grew up on, that I grew up on where I live with my parents, that you would have these days in the middle of winter, like January, February, where the ice we'd have like a 250 degree days in a row, the ice would come off the pond, and guess what? I was always out there fishing. I caught a ton of fish on a 1/4 ounce trap, and I would fish it like 3 different ways. Actually, really 2 different ways. One was I'm gonna cast that thing out to, again, where that deepest part of the water is, and just kind of yo-yo it off the bottom. Let it go up, let it fall down, let it go up, let it fall down. The other way is simply just casting it out and kind of just keeping it as close to the bottom as I can without actually digging in to the bottom. And I would find that sometimes when you would have those warm fronts that come through in the middle of winter, even in really cold water, those bass, even though they are close to deep water, would shift upwards, and they would be in just a couple feet of water. And I would cast adjacent to those deep parts of that pond that I grew up on, and I would catch those fish on that lipless crankbait in some of the coldest water. I mean, I don't know what the water temp was, but because it was frozen like days before that, I would imagine like mid-30s, upper 30s. So guys, finding deep water, fishing subtle lures, those are the 2 most important aspects when it comes to fishing from the bank in cold water. All right, guys, I appreciate you watching. Check out those fin shorts, and I will see you tomorrow.